So I think we can start. So hi everyone, I'm Juliette. I'm a part of the FGLM representatives, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the first seminar of 2022 today. And let's start with Pierre Kerner from Paris Cité University. So Pierre worked as, this I forgot to ask, enseignant-chercheur. I don't know how do you translate this in English. He's working
assistant professor,
thanks, at the Jacques Monod Institute in the Paris Cité University, in a lab that studied the stem cell evolution and regeneration, mainly using the worm Platinereis dumereli. But aside from his job to the lab and the teaching, Pierre also wrote books like Moi Parasite and Nature Secrète, and participate to La Méthode Scientifique, which is a podcast diffused on France Culture that talks about scientific news. He also has his own blog named Strange Stuff and Funky Things that aims to share curiosity of life sciences. So obviously here I wasn't really exhaustive with the example, and Pierre surely participated to more projects, but he will tell us more, I think, and I think we can start. So if you have questions during the talk, please do not hesitate to ask them directly by unmuting, or to write them into the chat if you have problem with the microphone. Okay, Pierre, you can go. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Juliette. What Juliette hasn't told you is that she was a former student of the Master Européen Genetics in the university I teach, and I'm going to reveal some of her own science outreach projects. But let's start right now by sharing my screen. So, do you see the animation? Yep. Perfect. Yep. Great. That is great. I'm going to do this way so they can follow right along. So, as Juliette told you, I'm Pierre Kerner, maître de conférence at University Paris Cité, so former Université de Paris, but we lost Tryon, and now we have to call ourselves Université Paris Cité. As you also revealed, I'm both assistant professor, but also during the night, I take my science outreach coat and I try to blog on my Strange Stuff and Funky Things blog that I will talk to you about. So why is there a link between science outreach and science? And for this, and as Juliette told you, I would like to have a participating seminar with you. And so as much as you want, you can interrupt me, ask me questions, and we're going to have an interactive talk. And the first question I'm going to ask is for you, actually, and it's about who inspired you to become scientists? Do you have any answers to provide to me? Who gave you the spark that makes you now in a science institute, acting as biologist, physicist, bioinformatics, and so on? I do not hear anyone. I hear crickets, the fear of any science outreach of any teacher out there. Maybe someone is answering in
hello. Can you hear me? Yeah. For me in particular, it was just animals in general. I was always interested in life science, so I wouldn't necessarily say that it was someone, but just animals in general, to study biology and then get into the field I am now.
All right, that's very noble of you. Is there any other answers about that?
Hey, hi. I don't know if you can hear me, but yeah, I mean, actually for me, it's the same. I do not recall anybody in particular, maybe one molecular biology teacher, which is a bit weird maybe, but it was really enthusiastic and great. And at the same time also, yeah, reading some books and discovering about amazing animals and stuff. And yeah, I think everything at once. Yeah.
That's great. That's great answers. Well, there are no wrong answers, but I'll provide mine. and you see this is maybe less noble that you think, but for me, and I don't know if there's many French speaking people in assisting this seminar, but some of you might be inspired by the same thing that I was inspired by. Mainly, so Science et Vie Junior, cartoons about la vie. So this one is called Il était une fois la vie, or some magazines such as this one is very important for me, especially as you can see here. There's a mole, la taupe in French, that is represented, and that actually a character that that was my pseudonym for starting to blog. And any of these old chaps, such as Sir David Attenborough, Carl Sagan, and these one are, for the French-speaking one, very famous ones that have a TV show called C'est pas sorcier. And as you can see, and as I can gather from any of your answers, those are not scientists. Maybe Carl Sagan is a scientist, but he dedicated his life to science outreach at the end of his career. But most of these projects are not based on scientist work, and that is for me a bit of a shame, because it tells us that there's not a huge bridge between the science community and the public at large, though I think this is very important to get inspired to make science, because if there's not any of this project, then there's no scientists, and I can guarantee you that. So basically, one part of my job that I feel is important is to narrow the bridge, narrow the gap that exists between the general public and the scientific community. So I would like to say that it's the reason why I started blogging on my blog to become a science communicator since 2009, but it's not exactly the case. But before I answer that, I'm going to show you some of my ongoing scientific projects to see that they are very, very diverse and dispersed. Basically, my science outreach projects revolve around first blogging with my site, Strange Stuff and Funky Things, podcasting and radio, such as Podcast Science and Radio France, teaching, such as this project that's called Culture Biologique Numérique, and that's teaching science outreach basically to students from the first year of university to the last year of university. Some citizen science projects, TV, books, and events. I'm going to show you. But all of this started with something very, very particular. During my last year of thesis, I was trying to work on a very important project, which was my thesis defense. The name of that project was Study of the Nervous System Evolution in Animals, Comparative Neurogenesis and Phylogenomics. And at this point in my life, I started to think, what could I do that would enable me to be as efficient as possible to write my thesis? And that was starting my blog. So I would not advise to do this, because it actually created a lot of problem in my time schedule. But at the end, it worked well, and I created this blog. So it's called Strange Stuff and Funky Things, basically because I wanted to share everything that I used to share with my friends, like taking out my smartphone and say, have you seen this creature? Have you seen this stuff that is strange to me? And I would put it in front of them. And at some point I thought, well, why don't I create a site where I could actually collect everything that I found around the internet that is strange and funky. So that was the beginning. And at first, the main topics were only strange stuff, such as this one. It was a dog poodle that was disguised as a Ninja Turtle. I found that very, very important. And at some point during the first month of the creation of the site, I delved into stuff that was strange, but also that had maybe a faint link with science, such as parasitism, or this, which became the mascot of the site, that's called the blobfish. And the idea was at first just to share stuff that was amusing to me, and I did not at the beginning started to try to make a link between science and the content of the site. But at some point, it started to get some attention and a bit of a fan base. So I wanted to promote that content. And in 2009, there were a lot of ways that you could actually create a promotion base on your blog, such as Reddit. This was the old days in 2009, but all of this stuff was were meant to enable you to highlight most of what you are doing on your blog, but none of them had dedicated content or dedicated category for science. So I was digging and digging, and at some point I came across a particular platform that was, and I have to say that though it is called Strange Stuff in Funky Things, it's all in French. And I found a community of French-speaking bloggers that was called Le Café des Sciences. And on this blog, I actually asked if I could join the rank of this community, and they accepted me in March 2009. So I had this little icon that I could put on my blog very proudly to say that I was a member of the Café des Sciences, and it's still ongoing. And nowadays you can see both on my sites and on the content of more than 200 science French-speaking science outreach and communicators that bear this sign of recognition from this community. Basically, you have to go through a vote phase in order to join the rank of the Café des Sciences. So on my blog, the fact that I integrated Le Café des Sciences basically created a shift between just sharing photos of strange dogs, and I tried I tried my best to speak about broad scientific discoveries, such as those ones, such as fossil discoveries or Toxoplasma gondii infection, or the fact that you could find some of the some fossils that would enable discussion about the evolution of men. But soon enough, I found that there was something that was really, really interesting to me, is a very strange scientific topic that sparks interest and then make you think, such as those ones. Why is this guy skin blue? It's a real condition, and you can find the answer by going to my site. What is this species of a snake with a tentacle? And of course, what is the origin of navel fluff, the worst parasite of humankind? So, and all of those enables us to actually delve in scientific topic, but in a fun way. And that's basically the editorial style of my site. Sorry, my cat is meowing because it wants to be fed, but it has to wait a bit longer. So one of the main feature of my site, if you have been to there, and I'm going to actually try to, on the discussion up. Oh, I see that someone says that Steve Irwin was my hero. So you see one person, sorry, I'm going to get this link. Okay, and go back to this. So I've linked to my site if you want to go there, and you will see that the banner here on my site is animated, and that was one of the main projects at some point for my blog, to change the old banner that spelled SSAFT to have a very funny animated banner. And for this, I actually solicited my viewership in order to create a new banner on the site. and collected some money to actually pay the illustrator and animator for them to create this fun site. And at some point, I wanted to try other things on my site, such as creating a newsletter. So now every month, people can have in their mail a connection with me by having a summary of everything strange and funky that I find on the month that I share on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and so forth. And I will now talk to you a bit about Le Café des Sciences, but I'm wondering if you have any question for the time being. Is everything clear about my the beginning of my science communicator career? Did you have any question about blogging?
I think so far it's pretty clear. It must have been quite a change to start so early in 2009, so up until nowadays. So how do you feel it has changed, like blogging, since more than 10 years?
It has dramatically changed, and some of it I'm going to explain, and some of this actually explain my exploratory avenue in science communication. At first, for me, blogging was the way to go because there was only blog. You could find some platforms that would share sound and video in 2009, but it was really, really early. And there was no YouTube, there were barely a Facebook, there was not yet a Twitter. So everything was rough. And basically blogging was the way to go at that time, but it changed drastically. And that will actually explain the changes in my communication avenue after that. One of these is actually creating the newsletter. Newsletter were actually present really, really early on, but the fact that we now rely more and more on newsletter is the fact that there is a dilution of communication through regular social networks. Basically, Facebook, Twitter, and everything has dampened the way people consume information. And a newsletter is one way to hamper that, to go around social network to directly go to your viewership. So yeah, it has changed. That I can say. So I'm going to talk to you about a bit about Le Café des Sciences, because it's a science community that is unique in France and which is very different to what you can find actually in other countries. I think the reason why is that the blogging community around English-speaking countries were gathered and founded around magazines such as Scientific American or National Geographic. And because of that, there was an instant professionalization of science communication in these countries. Whereas in France, it started with a community of, well, basically, I don't find the word in English, but bénévole, maybe someone can help me.
I would say volunteer.
Yeah, volunteer. So basically, yeah, it's some sort of volunteer work that that goes inside the Café des Sciences. It's just a hobby for most of the person, though it has changed in the past few years. But basically, because of that, there's a completely different dynamic between science communication in France and science communication in English-speaking countries. So basically, there's three parts of the Café des Sciences. First, there is a platform where all the content of the there's an aggregation of all the content from the science outreach that is created by the contributors of the Café des Sciences. Basically, there's a community of 200 communicators, and all of their content is shared on a platform that's called the Café des Sciences. There's an association, basically a community where you have to pay community fees in order for it to work. And that is going to fuel everything from the platform to other projects such as events, peer review, and live content. And there's also mailing list and Discord and every way that the community can speak together and create projects together. So there's 3 aspects of the Café des Sciences: the community aspect, the association aspect, and the platform aspect. And this created many projects in science communication. Some of them maybe you've heard about, such as Science en Live. This really exploded during the pandemic, basically because people were stuck at home, and the Café des Sciences created a platform where you could have every live on Twitch or other platforms, every live shows that were dealing with science gathered in a unique platform. So another one, for instance, is a project that's called Qui dit Science. I do not participate on this one, but I've seen a lot of people going in, and basically it's both illustrators and science communicators that work together in order to create content aimed at kids. So let's talk about last time about French-speaking blogosphere. So basically, as I told you, it's quite different from the blogosphere that exists in English-speaking, English-speaking communities. Basically, the reason why is that, for instance, this one, Le Monde Science or Scilogs, were created way after the Café des Sciences or other collectives and initiatives that were based on volunteer work. And because of that, the French-speaking blogosphere is revolving almost exclusively around, so the science French-speaking blogosphere is revolving around the Café des Sciences. Or if you look at the humanities and humanities science, around another project that's called Hypothèse. And that's another great one where you can see content on the blogosphere for the science French-speaking world. So now I'm going to talk about other type of communications. So that was the blogosphere. If you have any question about the blog, it's the time, because now I'm going to talk about podcasts, videos, and so forth.
I just have a question. Can you hear me? About the blog, about the content, did you decide it quite early on what type of, I think you already answered a little bit, but I wanted maybe to clarify this. Mm-hmm. If you already decided quite early on what you wanted to talk about and to discuss, or it kind of got refined with time and you kind of found your niche of what you wanted to talk about?
Sorry, of course someone is trying to call during the seminar. I cannot put it off. Sorry about that. Yeah, your question is quite interesting, and my answer is going to be strange. But at first, the first thing that I wanted to do on my site was basically share. Sorry about that. Someone told me that it's going to be recorded, so it's going to be very, very good seminar. Sorry about that. So the first content that I wanted to share on my site was basically resembling a Facebook page. I was watching pictures, I was watching animated GIFs, some strange videos, puff, on my blog. So it was really a sharing platform that resembles Twitter or Facebook. Most of it I kept as out of maybe nostalgia, but basically everything that is strange I shared on this. But at some point I wanted to create a bit of content that was more science savvy, and for this I created categories such as parasites. As you're going to see, that's one of the topics that interest me a lot, but also evolution, and sometimes I adapt into physics and stuff like that. And I created categories in order to talk about these different aspects. And nowadays, it resembles more the early days because I'm sharing most of my stuff on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and the most science savvy articles are really linked to other projects such as podcasting, videos, and so forth. But this you're going to understand more when you're going to when I'm going to explain the other projects. I see that Ayman was trying to ask a question. No, maybe I'm mistaken. All right. So other question about blogs? If not, I'm going to talk to you about radio. So the Café des Sciences was a community that I'd liked so much that at some point I became vice president of the association. And in order to promote the content of the persons that were inside the Café des Sciences, I tried to contact several avenues, magazines, and so forth. And at some point, I contacted Mathieu Vidard from the France Inter and his show that was called at the time La Tête au Carré. Now it's called La Terre au Carré. So La Tête au Carré is a square head, and now La Terre au Carré is squared Earth, basically. And during 2012 and 2013, as the vice president, I had a 1-minute editorial. It was very, very short, where I would sum up one of the articles that was published either on a podcast or blog that was present on the Café des Sciences. So it was very challenging for me. First of all, because I was very surprised that Mathieu Vidard accepted the proposition of having the Actualité de la blogosphère. So basically, what's going on in the blogosphere happened on France Inter so it's a national radio, and very challenging because in 1 minute I had to sum up an article that sometimes would be, I don't know, 10 pages long if it was printed. But it was both challenging and very, very interesting to me. And in the meantime, I was actually dabbing in other projects on podcasts, and you see that it's going to go full circle around that. So nowadays I continue to have chronicles, but they are way more easy to create. It's 10 minutes chronicle for another show that's called La Méthode Scientifique, and where I talked about various topics such as bird fossil trapped in amber, evolution of sponges, parasites, eels migration, evolution of flying fish, wings, and so forth. So for this, it's always 10-minute chronicles with 2 other guests, while we also discuss the scientific news ongoing that has happened during the week. For both these projects, I have to say that there is something that always how to say, irks me, or at least surprised me, is the fact that for this radio, there was a science news. So there was topics that needed to be discussed every week. Whereas most of the projects or topics that I presented were sometimes articles that were 1 month old or 2 months old. For me, science news is always kind of misleading for the great public, because basically it tells them that science can have their news, science can have their breakthrough in one week, whereas I think it doesn't give you the tempo of science. But we could discuss that afterwards. So basically, 2 radio shows for which I give chronicles, but I also tried podcasting because, and I don't know if you know about podcasts, but nowadays everyone knows about podcasts. For me, it was a discovery during my thesis because it allowed me to make a lot of experiments without being in my own head. I could do my experiments and be traveling to various regions by listening to podcasts, or listening to funny things, or even having a bit of scientific discussion by listening to the podcast in Nature or podcast in Science. So it was very interesting. And at some point, I wanted to try myself. So the last project I had on podcast was called La Nature sur écoute, and it was 3 episodes on bioacoustics that was broadcast on the Futura podcast platform. Always in French, I'm afraid to say. Another project is called, and this time is also volunteer work. It's called Podcast Science. It's an amateur podcasting platform, and that is the one that I'm most enthusiastic about, basically because compared to radio and compared to podcasts that have their format, on Podcast Science, basically everyone that is invited to talk about a scientific project, we have a rule is that when those invited guests want to continue speaking, they do, and we continue the flow of discussion until they have exhausted either themselves or the topic they were talking about. So it's very, very fun and very creative. Most of the person involved in this project on Podcast Science are very enthusiastic about science. Some of them are science communicators, others are scientists, and others are completely amateurs that work on informatics and so forth, but just are enthusiastic about science. And we have various topics, various way of communicating science. It's very, I found it very liberating. And if you understand French, I would give it an ear, because it's something that I'm mostly enthusiastic about, except sometimes the technical aspect of podcasts that though we have more than 450 episodes and shows, we're still struggling to both have a live show that is then recorded to create a podcast. Basically, if I have this magnificent mic, it's because of Podcast Science and my involvement in this show. So do you have any questions about radio and podcasts? Do any of you want to try to do radio? Do any of you listen to podcasts regularly, and scientific podcasts in particular? I see that podcast is not the theme of the day. So none of you are listening to...
Yeah, I have to say that I also discovered podcast during my Master 2 internship and start to listen to podcast, but not at all a scientific one. It was like a talk show and so on, because I got a little bit bored at the bench sometimes for the incubation times and so on. So I wanted to put music, but then I repeat always the same music. I discovered podcast, and now I'm still listening to podcasts, but I would like to try new ones. So if you have some good podcast, preferentially on Spotify if possible, because I mainly use this one. But
so for this, I'm going to go to the site of Podcast Science, and we created a list of podcast recommendation that we have. Up. So I'm going to find it in a pinch. So one of them that comes along in for the science for the English speaking community, the one that I would recommend as like in a pinch is called Radiolab. Do anyone know about Radiolab?
so I don't.
All right. So Radiolab is one of the best podcasts, one of the most immersive podcasts that I can think of. The one that I'm listening to the most recently for biology is called, sorry, I'm going to go to discussion in order to put this. So this is the document that I joined, is a document of recommendation. So it's in French, but you're going to find it quite easy. And it's separated in French, Science en français, and then in English. The one that I listen to the most is, so I see that people are getting connected. That's good. It's called Species. It's a guy called Mac and Murphy, and who's speaking only about animal species, basically. And the way he talks about them is really enlightening, because you get a real feel of how amazing those species are. So I would highly recommend it. All right, so let's come back to my presentation now. And now I'm going to talk to you about another way to reach the general public. And this, all right, so someone is, okay, thanks. Well, no problem. You're welcome. Another way to reach the the general public with your science might be to create events. So for events, one of them stems from podcast science, and the reason why I'm so enthusiastic about podcast science as a podcast is because the creativity there was unique. Especially, we created a new type of show. It's called the radio live sketch show. So basically, the idea was we would go to a particular location, then we will be in public with the podcast equipment to record live our show with the public, with interaction with the public. But also in the general assistance, there was illustrators that would illustrate live any of our scientific topic. And as you can see, there were many things that we discussed. There's one show that's called Tu t'es vu quand tu fais de la science. So for someone that is not French speaking, it's going to be way above the head. But basically, it was talking about the science of alcohol consumption. There was one called Podcast Science sort du placard, where we talked about LBGT topics with a scientific view. Les secrets du caca is secrets of poop, when we talked about poop for an entire night. So it was great. There's one about night where we actually recorded inside a planetarium. It was magical, and it was a 3-hour long show. It was great. So basically, any of this topic was discussed, and we both have a podcast show that is supplemented by drawings that we would have to describe live, because as a podcast, you can't see the drawing. So it was very challenging at first, but it actually works very well, because the jokes that are illustrated by the illustrators are usually graphic enough to be enjoyed after the show by going to the site, but also suggestive enough for it to be read out loud. You can read a drawing out loud, and I think it really works well. So that's a particular event, but there's also various formats that you could try if you want to try to share this way, such as Pint of Science. I don't know if you have a Pint of Science in, I think you have in Switzerland. Just wait a second. Just wait. I'm going to give my cat food because it's it's driving me crazy. Just wait a second. All right, fastest way of feeding a cat that you've been a witness of. So Pint of Science, have any of you participated in Pint of Science?
I participated, but in France. So in Switzerland, I don't know if there is. I never heard about that. But I'm only here since few months, so I don't know.
Okay, so Pint of Science, basically, it's an event, a yearly event that is organized around the world. I think it's initiated in England or in Australia. Both of those are the main organizers of Pint of Science. But then there's an organization that enables scientists all over the world to go to bars, and with a pint in their hand, they can discuss their own topic of science and discuss the work that they do in the lab with quizzes and stuff like that. So it's very easygoing, and because you usually have a pint drunk before your presentation, you're far more efficient to speak about your science than in a general poster session in a conference and so forth. Another way that I tried with my wife, Elise, was to do a visit of a museum where we visited. Basically, we have organized visit of a particular exhibit, and we discussed the different paintings with an eye about evolution. Of course, the exhibit was the exhibit was called Les Origines du Monde, and discussing how science was influenced by art and vice versa. So it was very interesting to discuss about how Darwin influenced some of the artistic movements. And we had a back and forth conversation with my wife, who's an art historian, and we could discuss this. So it's another way to discuss science with the general public outside of the labs and so forth. Have you ever tried to do this kind of events yourselves or not?
We could try in the future. That might be a good idea, just to have an opportunity to try to reach the general public. Yes.
Yeah. So one way to ask for that, and I think a lot of museums are willing to try to bridge those gaps, would be to try to, I don't know, send a message to your scientific museum of the region, or an art museum. It would also work, because sometimes they have exhibit and they're actually actively looking for, but they don't know how to look for persons that would be willing to share their knowledge about their scientific topic. So this is truly very interesting. What I would not recommend to do is what I'm going to present now, is to organize your own festival. And that's one thing that I did in 2017. So in January, during 2 days, I participated in the organization of a whole festival in a science museum in Paris that's called La Cité des Sciences. And basically, I would not recommend to my worst enemy because it was both time consuming and energy depriving project. It's one of the worst projects I worked for. A bit rewarding at the end, but not worth the time involved. So I don't know how those persons that are organizing their festival do, but it's actually one of the things I would not recommend, especially if you have another project on your own. If you're working full time, it's not possible to do that. But during that particular festival, I tried something that was quite interesting. It's so a merger between what I've tried as a podcaster, those radio live sketched event, and the idea of journal club. So I think as scientists, you have journal clubs of your own, but this time what we wanted is to create a journal club aimed at the general public. Basically, we involved several science communicators to speak about a topic. And as you can see, it's a topic that is discussed on the radio, by the way. So you see that you can recycle topics that you use for your science communication projects. And the main obstacle the main hurdle to go through for this is to explain what is a scientific paper to the general public, while you're actually discussing how this what is discoveries inside the paper. It was 1 hour long, and it was very interesting because the questions of the public were really surprising for science communicators that are also inside academics. And it enables you to have a new contact, a different contact with the general public, and maybe sometimes rethink what you think about the academics, especially when you tell them that you have to pay in order to get published. So this is a classic, and people do not understand how you would pay to get your article published in a journal article. No, sorry, in a scientific review. I highly recommend to do that, but to do that when you already have science communication in your blood, basically I would not recommend trying to do that as a first contact with the general public, because you have to juggle a lot with the discussions that are going to arise and be able to improvise on the spot. So as you saw, this festival is called Video Science. It's because I participated in the creation of a community inside the community, the Café des Sciences, of video content creator. So in 2009, those were non-existent. There were some platforms. One of them was called Real Player. It was very, very old. The other was QuickTime, and it did not enable you to stream videos on the internet. When that was possible, especially with the advent of YouTube, it created a new type of science communicators, and with that, the possibility to actually have other type of content and podcast and blogging inside the Café des Sciences. So here is a subset of the one that we know in French scientific. It was those that were invited in this festival Video Science, but as it's a very dynamic community, it created a lot of differences, and they have an outlook on science communication that is completely different from the blogging and podcasting community. So myself, I started to collaborate while I created this Video Science community with Dr. Nozman, who is not a doctor, actually. It's just a pseudonym. And at some point, we discussed the possibility for him to come to my lab or my university in order to make some nice observation. Especially, he was interested in microscopic observations. So we started to collaborate together, and that created a new format on his channels called the Observation microscopic observations. And basically, we had to invent everything from scraps, because we didn't know either him or myself how to apply his very expensive camera to those kind of things that we have lying around in the lab or in the university, such as binoculars. So basically, we took everything that we found lying around, such as this part here, which is some tubing that we found lying in a cupboard, and that was suitable in order to make those kind of images, such as crystallization on a slide, or observation of some worms here, Cenorhabditis elegans. And those were very popular at the time. And actually, for me, it was very transformative experience, because by helping a science communicator which was not in academics, his reactions to some of the things that we had lying around in the lab were really informative to me, because it told me of everything that I've lost, that I lost touch by working in the lab for so many years. And basically, his reaction when he was looking at a worm was like, wow, it's incredible. And I was like, well, it's Cenorhabditis elegans, it's just a worm. But his like enthusiasm was such communicative that at some point I was like, yeah, it's incredible. It's a worm that I can see on the microscope, and it really transformed my way of looking at things. And basically, I feel that there's another aspect of science communication is the way it can re-enchant your work at the lab. And I would strongly advise to be involved in science communication project, because basically it tells you what you're missing, what they are you're missing, and that you could share with the general public, but with yourself also. So I don't know if you have felt this kind of things by getting involved in science communication yourselves.
Yeah, in my case, I would like to, I don't know, to work for children books about science, maybe communicating about proteins and DNA and like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and so one way to have this kind of feedback from these would be to host visits of your labs. So when we finish discussing, I would strongly advise to see if there is things like that that are organized at your university or your institutes, if there are visits organized, and especially to pay attention, not maybe involve yourself as soon as possible in this project, but just to go there and be in the general audience yourselves and see the reactions of the children or the general public inside, and see what fascinates them the most. And sometimes it's completely bizarre because they're going to, you're going to show them protein models or very expensive machine, and they're going to look at a pipette and see like, for them it's Christmas. And it's really important to reaccount yourself with this kind of awe, like, wow, a pipette, what is this? How does it work? And basically what you take for granted in your line of work to look at through other eyes. And I would strongly choose. So another aspect of that was my teaching. At some point, you can. I don't know if some of you are involved in teaching, but I was never bored of teaching, but still. So Dr. Nosman, who's depicted here, he wanted to integrate the university. He never went to university during his educational course, but he asked my university if he could just look at courses and take notes and everything. So he started doing these vlogs in my university. And I could show him several aspects of teaching for the first year of university, such as going to an amphitheater or dissecting a cockroach and so forth. And basically, again, I was surprised as his look at the teaching, but also at general organization of academics and university in particular. So with Germain, who's it's the surname of Dr. Nosman, we have many other collaboration, and at some point we participated in a TV show on Science et Vie TV, and basically for 20 episodes we had 5-minute capsules where we visited labs, but also aquariums and institutions for biodiversity, and looking at various animals. And it's a TV show that you can watch for yourself. So did you have any questions about YouTube videos, TV, and so forth? And would one of you be interested in launching yourself in this kind of science outreach project?
So one question I have is that if you're gonna try to promote science using YouTube, I think you should also get really familiar with editing videos. And can you tell us a little bit about that process? How is to jump from doing science in the lab to having to edit videos, having to communicate them? It must be quite a learning process as well, right? I never edited a single video in my life, for example, so I wouldn't know how to do it.
So that's very, very important to have in mind before launching yourself to any project. For instance, for blogging, people are going to think that it's easy, but at some point you're going to have to deal with HTML language in order to promote or organize your site. So that's one hurdle. But for YouTube, and especially for video, you're going to have 3 areas that are very important. One is a script, But if you're blogging, usually you can manage to find the way to have a good script on your hand. The second is capturing. So basically, you should have all the equipment in order to have a good video quality, and especially a very good audio quality. That's one of the first advice that any video content creator is going to give you. Sound is more important than vision. And the third one is, of course, editing. And as you can see, if you go to my site or everything, every aspect of science communication I tried, because that's one of the things that I want to do as a science communicator, is to not to be an expert in a particular avenue, but to have delved in any of the science communication so that I can have relevant ideas to this particular way of communicating science. And you can see that I have a YouTube channel, but I've provided maybe 10 videos, and the first hurdle was editing videos. I can't say I'm not competent enough, but it's such time-consuming experience that I dropped it altogether. So basically, if you want to do a video, and a video of a high quality, for 5 minutes, you can double that in hours of first editing the video, and before that of capturing the video. So it's really, really time consuming. All the YouTube content creators that I know now have subdivided their logistics, with one person dedicated to editing, one person dedicated to taking the video and filming basically the scenes, and sometimes even writing the script is a third person involved in the project. So yeah, videos are not to joke with. It's a very, very time consuming and very hard to say. At the beginning, when you would have asked me in 2016, 2017, I would have said, go for it, try and do a video. Now, I would think twice before giving this advice, because I would like people to try writing or podcasting first to have a sense, or even working in an event and face-to-face with the public before trying to do a video, because the involvement and the investment in time and in sweat and everything, in efforts for doing a video, can be very, very degrading for the moral afterwards if you pass so many hours and then the result is subpar to what you wanted to achieve. I don't know if I depressed some of you, but that's the way I feel about video. Bear in mind that that's just a suggestion, and some amazing video content exists where a guy is just discussing a PowerPoint presentation, and that's still it's still able to achieve a great heights in science communications. But usually those persons have a lot of background and baggage before launching themselves. One of the example I would have in mind is in French-speaking videos. It's a French channel that's called Science Étonnante with David Loipre, who seems very relaxed about the way he's filming. Usually it's not that expensive background, not heavy on editing, but the time beforehand on the writing the script and being precise and so forth, and the example that is chosen is the amount of time that is needed in order to get a high quality video at the end. I don't know what deadline we have for the seminar.
So usually it's about 1 hour, but I don't know how long you have left.
I could speak for hours. I just wanted to show you two or three other aspects of my courses that we can discuss, and then we can have a general conversation. But I feel that by looking at videos, blogging, and podcasting, I've taught enough. The other way that usually people, sorry, the other categories that people have questions about are books. And I can just tell you about this a bit. So books, I've participated first in a book that's called La Science à contre-pied, and it was out of the Café des Sciences again, and 40 persons that was attached to the Café des Sciences community worked together in order to create a book of science communications. And it was very interesting because it gave me actually understanding of how editors worked for the general public, and it enabled me afterwards to make better choice. For instance, for this book, we had no way to say that we did not want this to appear on the cover. We still don't know what they wanted to create as to have a seal that have a wrong model of atomic. Well, it's horrible, but basically we were happy about the content that was inside, and afterwards I could make better choice for 3 other projects that I talked to, that Juliette talked to you about. One about parasites. So that was one of the way I recycled most of the content that was inside my blog, because a lot of strange and funky things I feel are related to parasites. So that's why I created my first book that's called I Parasite, or Moi Parasite. Another one was Retour vers le Paléo, but it was actually with 3 other bloggers or science communication content. Clotilde Chamussy, Jennifer Kerner, and Marion Sabourdi, with an illustrator that enabled to talk about early invention during the evolution of man. Basically, is paleo art some sort of a street art? When was beer invented, and so forth. And the last book that I did with Patrick Beau, that's called Nature Secrète. And I'm also going to try comics. So in October, I'm finishing right now a project for a comic book that is going to go out, and where I'm going to talk about Ivo Divo. So that's for books. I would have talked to you about teaching, but I fear that it's too much time on our end, and I would rather talk to you about basically what you want. So any of your scientific projects and comments that you would have on the presentation are welcome. And thank you for attention. At the end, maybe we could discuss also science outreach on social media, but that would be something that we could discuss live and not me by myself. So thank you for your attention. And now I will stop and we could discuss all together.
Thanks a lot. I would have a question if I could start.
Yes.
Yeah. If I got it correctly, the science outreach is basically something like your hobby, right? So you have a job on the side, right?
Yes.
So time-wise, I mean, how do you manage to do all these outreach projects and then still have your regular job, or how do you balance that?
Yeah, so I have an answer for that is short and then a longer one. The short one, I do not have kids and I do not sleep a lot. So that's a short one. The second one is basically because I created my blog in 2009 while I was finishing my thesis, I really envisioned the activity of science communication to go hand in hand with everything that I would do afterwards. I did a postdoc in New York, and while I was there, I was already thinking on what would I do if I was either a science educator or a teacher or an assistant professor in academics. And I really tried to articulate everything that I did so that I could include science communication. And fortunately, maybe alignment of stars and everything, it so happens that more and more institutes and university are fond of showing their work and reaching to the general public. Meaning that when I became an assistant professor, I could create teaching modules to teach science outreach projects. Actually, Juliette was involved in one of these projects where she and three of her comrades created a song, and I will provide a link. Sorry, Juliette, but that has to be
Not fair, Pierre. This is not fair.
well, this should not invite me. I'm going to find it otherwise. But basically, yeah. So this the idea is to have teaching modules that enables me to think about science outreach, but also share science outreach method and still perform science outreach myself. So it's I think it's a virtuous circle for the teaching. And more, I may also involved in the institute that I work for, the Jacques Monod Institute, in order to teach my fellow colleagues there in the research part to, for instance, set up a Twitter account and try to tweet themselves. So I do seminars in my institute to tell them how to do this, how to think about those questions. And more and more, there's also fellowships or funding agencies that asks the different labs to have some sort of time or even money devoted to science outreach project. And usually when this is the case, I'm the one they ask for help with. But if what you're asking is, does it have an impact on my research and my teaching? The answer basically will be yes. I do less research than would do an assistant professor that is entirely devoted to teaching and research. But my reasoning is, for me, assistant professor, or actually a researcher in general, should always have allocated science outreach in their profession.
Thanks a lot.
So I don't know if you have any questions.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed it. I wanted to ask you, do you always have like a topic you keep going back to? Like, oh, today I want to talk about, I don't know, arthropods again or whatever, because you come from an evolutionary biology background. Mm-hmm. So do you always find yourself talking about always the similar topics? How do you keep it fresh? How do you find some variety in what you are communicating?
No, it's strange, but actually the way I work well is by getting hurdles. By having my topic constraint, I feel that I'm going to be more creative. So basically, there is one topic that is going to be always around my work. It's evolution. But you know the very famous quote from Tadeusz Dobzhansky: "Nothing makes sense in biology instead if it's not in the light of evolution." And basically, I go to any topic possible in biology, of course, and at some point I get confronted to evolution. But the way I get most of my creative ideas is by having constraints. So those constraints can be format, and you saw all the formats that I have: radio, events, and so forth, or the starting points. In Podcast Science, for instance, we created starting points for every of the participating chroniclers, and the idea would have to have one word and start with that to get an entire story. Those words can be, and at first we used like colors, blue, red, and you have to get a 15-minute story about this that you can basically explain for 15 minutes, or transparency and so forth. There's a question inside. How big is the reach on social media platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, considering the attention span is becoming shorter and shorter, especially with the creation of shorter videos nowadays, which people consume in larger amounts? Do you also think the information may come across wrongly if the people do not dive deeper into the subject? And thank you for your presentation. Well, you're welcome. So first of all, for social media platform, I would agree that the content are short, but it actually mimics my attention span. so I have to actually I have lower expectation for science communication overall, because you always need to have in mind what you're trying to do. So the title of my presentation is Sharing Strange Stuff and Funky Things. And if your goal is sharing strange stuff and funky things, then if someone just clicks because it finds that something is strange or funky, then you've achieved your goal. But if you want to do something else, such as conveying an idea or teaching the general public, then your mission is going to be very, very hard. And I would not recommend going through social media. So my advice, if you want to share science, is to be honest with yourself and your mission from the get-go. For me, for instance, by doing a show with Dr. Nussbaum about microscopic observation, is not to convey to most of the people that are going to consume those videos how crystallization works. Is to convey, wow, those guys put a camera on a binocular and they visualized a crystal. That's so cool. And that's it. And for this, I'm happy. Because if you go back to my second slide, when I was looking at cartoons about life, the first thing was, wow, there is some bizarre looking guys that are strolling into my veins and bringing oxygen. It's not at all how it works. But I was amazed about what you could discover. And I think that this spark is very important and should not be frowned upon from general science. So the scientific community is always have difficulties with this particular subject, which is the honest information that is conveyed and the amount of time that you provide in order to create this content. I would not have an answer for that, but for me, if you're honest from the get-go to your mission, and for me it's just sharing strange stuff and funky things, then you would not be disappointed with your aim. I don't know if I answered your question.
So I also have a question. I wondered, because you have to collaborate a lot with the graphist or co-writer or illustrators for your book and so on, how do you find this collaboration? Is there, are there persons that you know personally, or do you have recommendation by your network or so on?
Yeah, so for the first project that I worked on, Moi Parasite, basically it was person that I knew. One was my father-in-law, so pretty easy to to ask. And by the way, the funny story is that my father-in-law used to draw in Sciences et Vie Junior. So I realized that maybe after 2 weeks after meeting him, he was he had a little illustration on his desk, and then I realized that, wow, this guy is actually one of the reasons I got into biology, because he had a little drawing of a virus, and I remember vividly of this virus. So I was so happy that I could work on a particular project with that. All right, see you, Joran. And the other guy was actually a doctorate in my team, so it was pretty easy to. So he was a PhD student, and I asked him because he had a very good illustration skill if he wanted to join my project. But for my last one, for the comics books, basically the editor asked me if I wanted to do a comic book. I said that I had a project for them. I tried to say that I wanted a particular illustrator, but they were not happy with that, and they provide me with an illustrator on their own. And basically, I had to explain everything that I did, because she's completely devoid of biology knowledge, and it was at time challenging, but most of the time very, very good for the project overall, because it helped me clarify most of the things that I wanted to convey. So to answer your question, it depends on the project.
Okay. Short answer, right. Okay, I think there's no more question. Thanks a lot for participating to this first seminar. I think it was a success.
Thank you.
So hopefully we could see you again another time. And yeah, thanks again a lot.
No problem. If you want, I'm going to provide you with the slides so that you can share.
Yes.
And if you have any questions, so you can reach me on social media or through my site or through my address. So it's pierre.kerner@igm.fr.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.